All right, everybody, welcome, welcome, welcome. Very excited to have you here. If you are looking for the exact, clear-cut plan of how to get rid of your anxiety, keep it out of your life for good, then this is definitely going to be the one that you want to be paying very close attention to. If you don't know me or if you're new to my community, welcome. My name is Ty Hicks, founder of mentalhealthcoaching.com. And I put these resources and videos out there for you because there was a time in my life where my mental health was at its lowest, incredibly high anxiety, suicidal depression as a result, tried traditional therapy, medication, hospitalization. None of that stuff really worked really well for me. But I did find a method that worked incredibly well, and I've been able to be anxiety and depression free for well over 10 years now. And I put these pieces of content out there because I want you to have the mental health that you deserve. Any human being can live a life without anxiety and depression. There's just a certain set of skills that you have to master. There is a system that you have to learn. And so we put this out there because we believe everybody should be able to learn how to do that. So today I'm doing something a little different, and I got to be honest with you, I was a little nervous about doing this because the title of today's talk is, if I had to overcome anxiety all over again, this is exactly what I would do. Because now, having the experience that I've had, both dealing with my own mental health and keeping it how I want it to be for a really long period of time, but also helping now, we're closing in on about 600 clients that we've helped get the mental health that they deserve, where we've reduced their anxiety at least by 75%, usually a lot even more than that. And it takes about 90 days for us to get that done. Some people a little shorter, some people a little longer, but very reliably we're able to help people get at least a 75% reduction. So certainly don't know everything. Each year I keep getting a little bit better at this, but there's a very clear roadmap that I've been able to identify and refine. And I'm not saying it's necessarily the only way to do the job, but it is the one that works really, really well for us. And what I wanted to do is I'm basically going to hold nothing back for the next, 58 minutes here or so. I'm going to give you every single detail I can possibly squeeze in about exactly what I would do if I could go back in a time machine and start from scratch. Knowing what I know now, this is exactly what I would do. So definitely want to take some close notes, pay very close attention. And my sincere hope is that if I just give away the secrets, if I just tell you, here's exactly what you need to do, you're going to be able to either A, do it on your own, which more power to you if you do that, that's great. Or B, you'll decide that you want a little bit of help with doing it faster, making sure you don't make mistakes. And hopefully I can make sure that I can earn your trust to help guide you through that process. But without any further ado, let's get going. So there are three main phases that I have learned over the years are essential for making sure that somebody is really able to go from just coping and managing anxiety, coping with anxiety, managing anxiety. You know, that feeling where you've got a couple strategies in place, maybe some things to reduce the anxiety by 10%, maybe 15%, or to kind of get through the day. That's where most of the people in our community are hanging out, and they've gotten to a point where they're not entirely even sure if they can really live a life with anxiety. And honestly, if you were here on a video like this, hearing a stranger you've never met saying, oh, you can live a life without anxiety, you'd probably be very skeptical, and you'd be very right to do so, because there are a lot of people out there who are basically selling snake oil. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. They're basically stealing other people's content, and just, they have no experience helping people with these issues or their own. So I totally agree. You should be skeptical, but I'm just telling you, this is what I know. This is what's worked for me. This is what's worked for the people that we know. Hopefully it would work well for you too. And what I found is there are basically three main phases. And then within each one of these phases, there's a couple steps. Okay, so I'm going to lay it out as clearly as I can. It looks like I've got 9 different steps inside of these 3 phases. So 9 steps total, 3 phases total, okay? So the very first thing that has to be done, okay, phase number 1, is we have to help you learn how to retrain the brain. Now, what does that mean? Well, what that means is most people know they need to think more positively. Most people know that they need to stay more in the present moment. They need to be more mindful. The challenge is actually getting the brain to do that. And most people use simple little wimpy coping mechanisms. So they might journal, they might meditate, they might go exercise, they might go listen to music. And all of those are great, but what those really are is they're coping mechanisms. They're distractions. And they will make you feel better temporarily, but the challenge is that they're not going to be able to help you actually deal with the long-lasting issue that is going to be popping up. If we want to deal with the long-lasting issue that's popping up, what we've got to do is retrain the brain to think positively by default and to feel content by default. Those are the two critical things. And so what we have to do is we have to switch out of the coping mentality and move into the conditioning mentality. Now, how do you actually do that? So this is exactly what I would do. If I could sit myself down and say, hey, do this, do this, do this. Here's what I would do. What I would do is I would get a piece of paper, and what I would do is I would draw a line right down the center of the paper. The left-hand side would represent what I am currently doing that is making me anxious. The right-hand side would be all the things I need to do to feel peace of mind, content, joy, those sorts of things. Just got a notification from somebody says that they're having some issues hearing me. Everything looks good on my end. Can you guys just put a yes in the comments if you can hear me, if you can see me, if everything's going well, please let me know. All right. And then also in the comments, can you let me know how many years have you struggled with anxiety? It will help me teach you a little bit better if I can see how long have you struggled with it, and then what type of anxiety are you dealing with? Health anxiety, social anxiety, etc. That will definitely help, okay? Thank you, thank you, thank you. So here's what I would do. Very first thing I would do is I would draw a line down the center of the paper. Left-hand side represents anxiety patterns, okay? Right-hand side is going to represent peace of mind patterns, okay? So that's how we would separate it between those two columns. And what we would do is we need to identify two types of patterns. So I have the line down the center of my paper, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide it in half horizontally as well, okay? So you're going to have basically 4 boxes, and what we're looking for is we need to identify basically 2 things. So we've got 2 rows and 2 columns. 1 column for anxiety, 1 column for peace of mind, and 2 rows. Okay, the first row is going to represent what are you focusing on. So the very first question I would ask myself way back then is I would say, what are the top 3 things that you are focusing on habitually? If you're feeling anxiety on a regular basis, your mind is focusing on the same sorts of things regularly. So the common example that people have is they will focus on some type of vision of the future going badly. So if it's health anxiety, you might worry about having a heart attack or something going wrong at a doctor's appointment. If it's agoraphobia, you might worry about getting in a car accident or fainting out in public. If it's social anxiety, you might be anticipating somebody's not going to like you at the party, okay? But it's almost always some version of focusing on a future that you fear. If you can isolate what that specific thing is that you tend to focus on regularly, that is the very first step to getting rid of the anxiety for good. So for me, at the time, the big things that I was focusing on was I definitely had a vision of the future that was not good. So that would have been the first bullet point I would have written down. I would have written down future plus fear. And I was in my teens at the time, so I was imagining high school was going to go horribly and the rest of my life was going to go bad, and there was really no point to living anymore. The next thing that I was focusing on most consistently, and I think a lot of you guys can relate to this, is I was focusing on what I could not control, particularly other people's behavior. So other people that were affecting my life, okay, that I didn't really like. So I was focusing on other people's behavior that I couldn't control, and I was also focusing on other factors in my life that fundamentally I couldn't really control either, things that were just outside of my control, basically. I forget exactly what they were at the time. It was probably things like, my high school and my teachers and, different things going on with the economy or stuff like that. Okay. So, by the way, for those of you guys who are saying that the picture is freezing or the video is not going so well, go ahead and try to refresh the page, and that should hopefully clear everything up because it's looking fine on my end. Everything seems to be going fine. Okay. All right. So I would write down those things. I'm focusing on the future that I fear. I'm focusing on the things outside of my control. And those would be the key things that I would want to be able to isolate, that I'd be focusing on. All right. The next type of pattern that I would need to isolate is I would be looking at what kind of repetitive language it is that I am dealing with. What kind of things am I saying to myself repetitively? So I'll give you guys a little bit of a tip. Almost always, people who are dealing with anxiety chronically, you have somewhere between 3 and 6 repetitive language patterns that you keep saying to yourself, whether you're aware of them or not. They're what we call your incantations. So if you can identify what those incantations are, you've got basically the next big step in the puzzle necessary in order to make sure that you can deal with the anxiety for good. So the reason why a lot of people don't get very far with therapy is because in therapy, they end up saying the same sorts of things every single week all the time. So basically, what they end up doing is they reinforce the old language patterns that keep them feeling stuck in the first place. If you want to actually feel differently, you have to start with changing your repetitive, habitual, automatic thoughts. Okay, it's thoughts first, feelings second. You want to remember that phrase: thoughts first, feelings second. And that's something I didn't understand way back when. I was too focused on what I felt and how crappy I felt. And I didn't, if I would have been able to realize, like, okay, I need to just start by changing my repetitive, habitual thoughts. If I could have just gotten that, that would have saved me like 18 months worth of time. So that would be the first big thing I really want you to understand. So these are the two core, most essential building blocks. This isn't everything that, like you can learn about your psyche, but if you really want to eliminate anxiety, you want to do it as quickly and as fast as possible, you must identify these two core current patterns. You must identify, what am I focusing on habitually? What are the top 1 to 3 things I keep focusing on repetitively? It's almost always something in the future that you fear, and it's usually also some sort of things outside of your control. That'll kind of give you a little bit of a shortcut. The second core thing you must identify are, what are the 3 to 6 things I keep saying to myself linguistically? What is the language that I keep using repetitively? If you're not sure what that might be, what you can do is you can go to people around you who know you really well and ask them, like, hey, what would you say are the 5 to 6 most common phrases you hear me say? That would be a really, really good indicator. And what you can do, a simple little experiment I run with my clients, is we'll isolate what those language patterns are, and I'll have them say each one of them to themselves, and I'll say, okay, say this sentence, and then tell me 0 to 10, how much anxiety does that make you feel? And so we'll go through each one of the language patterns, and they'll be able to figure out which ones are the heavy hitters. And those are the ones that we start with. Because basically, like, if you wanted to think about, like, if you wanted to block all traffic from coming into a city, you wouldn't start with the side streets. You'd start with the highways, right? So if we want to make sure that we eliminate anxiety, in the same way, we want to knock out the highways in your brain, not the little side streets. So we want to start with the language patterns that make you feel the most anxious, or the language patterns that you use the most repetitively. Those are going to be the ones where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck focusing on. Similarly, a lot of you guys, some of you guys are hearing this and you're like, I don't really know if I talk to myself very much, but I do visualize things. So for those of you guys who are more visual like I am, you might have a very particular picture in your brain you keep visualizing, like, well, what if I go drive my car and I get in a car wreck, right? You might make a picture of that. Or you have a picture of yourself like losing your job and failing and your life going horribly or whatever. So you got to figure out what that particular pattern is, and I'll show you what happens next, right? So this is phase 1, step 1. You need to identify all of your old patterns, all right? The next thing that you want to do is step 2. So phase 1, step 2 is you've got to interrupt and replace those patterns. So this is where I said you're going to have that piece of paper, you're going to have the line down the center, and we're then going to pinpoint, what are we going to replace the old patterns with? So that's where we got to put that in the right-hand column. Now, in the same way, we just need to figure out 2 things. We need to figure out, what are you going to focus on that makes you feel how you want to feel? And what are you going to start telling yourself that makes you feel how you want to feel? So in other words, what are the new language patterns that you need to reinforce? Because repetition creates belief. Anything you say to yourself enough times becomes something that you believe. That's how you've come to believe all this anxious garbage anyway. So we've got to actually make sure that you get to feel how you want to feel. Okay. So what we're going to do is, I'm just going to give you the shortcuts, but, well, actually, no, I'm not going to give you the shortcut. I'm going to tell you, here's what I would do. So here's what I would do, and this is kind of what I do with a client. What I'll do is, with a client, is I'll say, tell me about a time. Well, first I'll ask them, how do you want to feel? Like, instead of anxious, how do you want to feel? Like, what is your target state is the key word that we use, your target state. And they'll tell me usually something like confident or content, or, just calm, like peace of mind, okay? I recommend the word content. It's a really good target state word. Don't use calm, because as you've probably found, the more you chase after the feeling of calm, the less calm you feel. Calm is a paradoxical emotion. The more you try to get it, the less you actually feel it. So content is a little bit better. So let's say you want to feel content. What I would do is I would then ask you, okay, Tell me about a time when you felt content in the past. And a lot of people want to go, oh, I don't even know. I don't feel content. But that's bullshit. There's been a time in the past where you felt content. So you figure out what that is. And then I'd ask you, what were you focused on in that moment? And you're going to say almost always, you're going to tell me that you were focused on the present. And more specifically, though, you were focused on things that you could appreciate about the present. And that is a really key thing. Because most anxious people, like you guys, you know you need to be focused more on the present. That's not new information to you, but it's tough to do that. You probably find it really challenging to do that on a repetitive basis. So how do you actually train your brain to focus on the present? Well, I found if you really want to feel content regularly, there's two sort of shortcut paths to doing this. Number one, then this is what you would write in that sort of right-hand column, upper right-hand box. Okay, 2 bullet points you would write there, more than likely. Probably 80% of you. What you would write is you would write future plus desire. What that means is you need to train your brain to focus on a vision of the future going how you want it to go, rather than how you fear it going. I know that sounds really, really common sense. I know this sounds basic. I'm going to show you how to actually do that in a second, okay? But we got to train your brain to focus on the future that you want, not the future that you fear. I mean, and by the way, does this make sense to you? Does it make sense to you that if your brain keeps automatically focusing on the future you fear, you're going to feel anxiety for the rest of your life? We must train your brain to, when it thinks about the future, to imagine the future going well. Would you at least agree on that? We must get the brain to do that. I hope so. Okay. The second thing that we need to train the brain to focus on is when it is focused on the present, we must get your brain to focus on what you appreciate about the present. So what I would have you write down in your little box there is present plus appreciate. So the two things we got to get your brain to do is focus on what we appreciate about the present and how do we want the future to go, rather than focusing on how am I afraid the future is going to go? And for a lot of you, when you focus on the present, you focus on what's wrong with the present, what's missing. For a lot of you with self-esteem issues, what you have a tendency to do is you look for flaws in yourself by default, like by habit. And we've got to train the brain to be searching and scanning and seeking out a totally different pathway of information. So that's sort of the key thing. Language-wise, I would also ask you, okay, this time when you felt really content and you felt confident, tell me, what were you saying to yourself, right? And if you think long enough and hard enough about it, it's a little tough to do it on your own, but you can do it. You can figure out what you believed in that moment or what you were saying to yourself that made you feel content and confident and things of that nature, okay? I have lots of other trainings about language and all sorts of stuff. I'm not going to go into all the specifics there, but the long story short is you must do this first phase of retraining the brain. And to do that, the first step, so phase 1, step 1, is what we call pattern mapping. You must map out what is causing me to feel anxious and what in the past caused me to feel content. What did I focus on? What did I tell myself? You might not think it's as simple as this, but I'm trying to obviously make it super simple and accessible. It is really as simple as this. It's as powerful as this. Because now we move to step 2. So phase 1, step 2 is where we actually do interruption and replacement. So here's exactly what I would do. If I could start all over, this is exactly what I would do. I've done this hundreds of times with clients. It works really well. What I would tell myself way back then is I would give myself what we now call the rumble strip. The rumble strip is what you do is you take a little piece of paper and you write down, the simplified version of it is you write down 2 questions. Okay, what you write down is question number 1, how do I want this to go? And then question number 2 is you would say to yourself, what meaning will I give this? Okay, how do I want this to go? What meaning will I give this? That would be the core one I would have given myself all those many years ago. And basically, here's how it works. So if you think of a rumble strip like on the side of the road, when you're driving on the road, you start to veer out of your lane, you hit the rumble strip wakes you up, you get back in your lane. Well, in a similar way, what's happening as you go through your daily life is your mind will have a tendency to veer out of lane, metaphorically. As in, it'll start to imagine bad things happening in the future. You'll start to tell yourself negative language things, right? It'll veer into those old negative patterns. So, and if you try to just remind yourself, that doesn't tend to work very good. What you need is you need like a physical trigger. Like imagine if you could like if your phone could vibrate every hour or so, and it could immediately remind you to think more positively, right? That would basically like break the pattern up again and again and again and again. And so that's what we've done. I experimented with this years ago. It worked like a charm. I've given it to almost all of my clients. It works really well. This is the simplified version of it I'm sharing with you today. So you put it on a piece of paper is the standard way to do it. We give our clients like a digital wallpaper they put on their phone. But you put it on a piece of paper. It works just fine. You fold it up. You put it in your pocket. As you go through the day, you'll remember that that piece of paper is there. When you remember the piece of paper is there, it's like a physical trigger, right? You're like, oh yeah, that piece of paper is there. Just like the rumble strip on the road is a physical trigger. You take the piece of paper out of your pocket and you go, how do I want this to go? So let's say you're at work, you're in the middle of the workday, you're feeling a little anxious, and you ask yourself, how do I want this to go? Well, what that triggers you to do is to envision the remainder of the day going how you want it to go. Or the next meeting that you have to go into in the boardroom going how you want it to go. Or you've got a date night with your spouse coming up and you would typically feel anxious out in a social situation. Now you're going to get your mind to imagine it going how you want it to go. Okay? So what you're doing is at least, 10 to 12 times a day, you're stopping the brain. You are, write these words down, you are interrupting and replacing. These are the keys to reconditioning and training the brain. So if you want to interrupt and replace the old pattern, you have to have a trigger that reminds you, that catches you in the middle of the old pattern. So you can set a timer on your phone to vibrate once every hour, or you can put the piece of paper in your pocket. Either way tends to work, but you really need to do it about 10 to 12 times a day for about 2 weeks. Now, the typical thing that happens is, let me explain the second question real quick and then I'll explain. So the second question, what am I going to choose to make this mean? Okay. So let's say that, I'll use social anxiety as an example. Let's say that before, you would typically imagine going out in public and you'd imagine having an anxiety attack and it all going horribly and everyone hates you and you're embarrassed. Okay, and the language that you would say to yourself is something like, I'm not going to be able to do it. I can't do it. It's too hard. Okay, things like that. Now you know you need to train your brain to imagine going into a social setting and it going really well. But you also need to add the language component to it as well. You need to create a new empowering meaning and condition that new empowering meaning so that your brain learns to attach that meaning with the trigger. So what you do is you'd imagine the social setting going really well, and you would go, okay, what am I going to choose to make this mean going out on this date night with my husband? Okay, I'm going to choose to make this mean that I can do this and I will do this, and it's going to be fun. Okay, so what this does is it causes you to stop the internal dialogue that's going on inside of your mind randomly, and then to insert new internal dialogue. All right, so the metaphor here is, think of it this way. Your brain is basically like a jukebox. And if I go up to a jukebox and I type in some numbers, I'm going to get a particular CD that is attached to that sequence of numbers. So the CD represents your particular pattern of anxiety. So your pattern of anxiety may be, for example, you imagine yourself getting in that car accident and you tell yourself, I'm going to die, it's going to go horribly, right? There's some combination of what you focus on and what you tell yourself. That's true for everybody with anxiety. What you focus on and what you tell yourself. You may not necessarily visualize it. You may not necessarily have a lot of internal dialogue, but I promise you there's something you're focusing on and there is a meaning that you're giving things. And if you isolate that pattern, now you can know what to break that apart with, what to replace that with. So every time you use this rumble strip and you go, wait a minute, what am I going to choose to focus on? What am I going to tell myself instead? It's like you're scratching that CD. So every single time that CD goes to play, you scratch it and you scratch it and scratch it and scratch it. And if you scratch it enough times, believe it or not, this is exactly what happens with our clients. It really works. You scratch it enough times and your brain gets confused, but confused in a good way. Confused in the sense that it used to just go into anxiety mode automatically, but now it goes, huh, I don't know if I want to go down anxiety mode anymore. There's this other pathway that now seems a little bit better. And you'll start to replace the old pattern with the new pattern. Okay. Now, this is not everything you need to know. There's still 2 other phases left, but this is phase number 1. Okay. That's the first critical thing. And this is what we have probably 70% of our clients do. It's a little more in depth when they do it with us, but that's kind of the basics of it, okay? And the first 2 weeks, they're working on the rumble strip, a couple other things, but certainly their first 7 days, this is the first assignment I give them. And when people do it, they usually will get anywhere between a 10 and a 20% anxiety reduction so long as they do it properly and they do it consistently. If you just do it 1 time a day, it's not going to do anything. You got to do it at least 10 to 12 times a day. So usually once an hour while you're awake is kind of the best rule of thumb with that, all right? Can you guys let me know if this makes sense and if you guys are excited to hear phase 2? Go ahead and put phase 2 in the comments, all right? But remember, phase 1 is retrain the brain. Step 1 is identify every old pattern. Step 2, interrupt and replace. All right, so now we're moving on to phase 2. Phase 2 is, let me explain a little bit. When I got started helping people as clients, I didn't even fully understand what enabled me to be anxiety free for so long, but I knew this concept of retraining the brain. So I really focused on that. But the challenge I had is that some people would do really well for a couple weeks or a couple months, and then they wouldn't be able to maintain it. And I was like, what the hell is going on? There's got to be like a deeper reason why the anxiety is there. There's got to be a way to make sure we deal with the anxiety in a way that lasts. And that's what really birthed phase 2. I discovered phase 2 about 5 years ago, and we've been prioritizing this ever since, and it's worked fantastically. Okay, so phase 2 is handle the anxiety from the root source. Handle the anxiety from the root source. So what I realized is if we kind of do these little mental retraining games, that can work really well. But I didn't have like 100% of my clients succeeding, and I wasn't happy with that. So I wanted to figure out, how do I make sure that everybody deals with this in the long-lasting way? And what I realized is that some people had some deeper underlying belief systems that were getting in the way and causing them anxiety. So for example, there's basically kind of 2 types of people with anxiety. One type of person is a type of person where, like, let's say they grew up and they'd never had an anxiety issue, and then they turned like 35 or whatever, and they got in a car accident, and then now all of a sudden they've got anxiety around driving a car. So it may not be driving a car, but basically they encounter some type of a significant emotional event in adulthood. They didn't have anxiety growing up as a kid, but now they do. And in those cases, phase 1 is very often, not always, but very often enough. If we just literally retrain the brain to do what it used to do, that's usually enough for those people. But there's a second type of people with anxiety. And the second type of people, some of you, and you guys let me know, are you number 1 or are you number 2? Number 2 type of people is you've had anxiety basically your whole life, for as long as you can remember. It's been with you probably, especially since like age 10 to 12 is when you probably really started to notice feeling anxious, maybe feeling depressed, dealing with some emotional issues. And we need to tackle things a little bit differently if you are number 2. If you're person number 2, what that means is that you have been developing internal belief systems. Hear me really, really clearly right now. You need to hear this very clearly. What you've been developing is you've been developing internal belief systems that constantly clash with your daily life. So for example, let me give you the most obvious example that exists, which is perfectionism. So you grew up as a kid and you brought home an A on your paper, and your parents go, why wasn't it an A plus? Right? And so what ends up happening is you start to develop this mental pattern of looking for flaws in yourself because you want to find the flaws first, so that way mommy or daddy doesn't find the flaws. If you think that if you can find the flaws and correct it and just be perfect, then you'll be good enough and mom and dad will give you love and you'll feel secure and safe and comfortable like all kids want to feel. So for the second type of person, what ended up happening for you is you created a model of the world. Key phrase you need to know. If you are really dead set serious about living a life with anxiety, you must know this term, your model of the world. Basically what that means is you've created a set of beliefs about who you need to be and how the world needs to be, and that model of the world is not gelling with how your life actually is. In other words, like, you think you need to be perfect, but lo and behold, you're not perfect. So you keep having anxiety about all of your imperfections. Or you have a model of the world that says you need to achieve things constantly. And you feel really good when you're achieving things, but then you feel deficient and you don't feel good about yourself, and your anxiety ramps up when you're not achieving things or when things are slow. Or the other common one is you have convinced yourself that you have to please everybody. You got to get everybody's approval. And if somebody doesn't like you or they get a bad opinion of you, that's not going to work. You can't stand it. That means you're not good enough. And so you constantly have anxious thoughts about what people think or what they could think or what you did in the past and all these different things. So basically, what's happening is you have a clash between your beliefs and how life is. Okay, so what you got to understand in phase 2, you must understand the following. So the step 1 of phase 2 is you must understand the formula for peace of mind. The formula for peace of mind is when your life conditions equal your expectations. Can someone put that in the comments, please? When your life conditions equal your expectations or your model of the world, same thing. Okay, your expectations are just your model of the world is just all of the expectations you have about yourself and about how your life should be. Okay, so for example, if I'm a guy who, and this is pretty much what my old model of the world was, is I got to be super, super successful. I got to be wealthy. People got to think that I'm an expert, blah, blah, blah. And if I don't get everybody to like me and believe that I'm the smartest person in the room, then I'm not good enough as a human being. Okay, that used to be like my old model of the world. And I used to have a lot of anxiety around all sorts of stuff like that. And so if someone believes they have to be perfect, that's their expectations, right? Well, what are the chances that they're ever going to be perfect? What are the chances that their life is ever going to match up with that set of expectations? You let me know in the comments, guys. What's the chances that that's going to happen? 0. It's not going to happen. If I have a set of expectations that says I got to be achieving things all the time, that's going to create a problem too. I might be able to achieve things some of the time, but certainly not all of the time. So if you have had anxiety for a really long time, like decades, long time, especially since childhood, more than likely you have belief systems that we have to deal with. You have conflicts in your belief systems that we have to address and we've got to deal with. In other words, we've got to help you be able to really feel in your bones that you don't need to be perfect, that you don't need to be achieving things all the time, that you don't need to please everybody all the time, that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. Okay, whatever it is that you convinced yourself you have to be. The other common one is believing that you have to take care of everybody else's problems. Okay, so whoever it is that you've convinced yourself you have to be, that you keep getting anxious around, I got to be this person, I got to take care of this, we got to convince you that you don't need to do that. We have to help you really unlearn those beliefs. And we've got to help you reclaim your sense of self-worth. And that takes some deeper digging. So here's basically what you need to do to make that happen. These are kind of the big steps. This is exactly what I would do if I had to start all over, knowing what I know now. First of all, I would really make sure I understand that I have to find equilibrium between my life conditions and how I expect things to be. That's the ultimate goal, is to create an equilibrium between those two things. That means that for the things in my life that I can control, that I'm not happy with, I can tweak and I can adjust and I can make them how I want, and that's okay. But for the things that are outside of my control, such as people not liking me and me believing they must like me in order for me to feel peace of mind, now I've got a conflict in my belief system. So step 2 of phase 2 is I would identify every conflict in my model of the world with my life. So I would write out, here's a simple way to do this. Here's this really simple way to do this. You can basically finish or start the sentence with I should, ... and then just finish that sentence. So people will come up with answers like, okay, I should be the perfect dad. I should, have everyone should like me all the time. I should be invited to every party out there. I should be perfect. I should be making, multiple 6 figures a year. whatever it is that you need to write out. So you start with I should, then you go to other people. So you go other people should, okay? And then um, that will give you the lion's share of your beliefs and the expectations that you've been holding on to in your subconscious that are probably conflicting with your life. Now, it's very, very, very important when you do this to make sure that you do not edit the list. So you want to make sure that basically you are just kind of doing a stream of consciousness. You're going, okay, I should this, I should this, I should this, I should this. Don't judge it, don't edit it, don't try to make it sound good. Don't go, oh yeah, but that's unreasonable. I don't know if I can really meet that expectation. Of course you can't meet most of these expectations, but you got to get them out of your head and get them on paper, or else you're going to have no chance in hell in figuring out how to balance this equation. So as you get out all of these expectations on paper, what it's like that you're doing is think of like the scales of justice, right? So if you can visualize the scales of justice, it's got the two sides. You've got your life conditions on one side, you've got your expectations on the other. If you're feeling lots of anxiety, all you know is that there's a big imbalance between how your life is and how you expect things to be. That doesn't really help you very much, just knowing that that's out of balance. If we want to empower you to actually create a balance, what you would need to know is you would need to know what all of those expectations are that your subconscious is holding against you. So what you got to do is get them out on paper. And as you get them out on paper, you'll be able to map them all out. So let's say you've got 50 or so, like the average that we find with clients is usually between like 35 and 60 is usually the amount of total expectations that we find. We have kind of a process that we use that works well for figuring it all out. But what I just told you is kind of a rough and ready way that you could do it. All right, so you figure out what all those expectations are, and now you find out, like, let's just say it's 50. Now I've got 50 expectations, and only 10 of those expectations are met with my current life conditions. So what that basically means is it's like you've got 50 pounds of weight on one side of the scales of justice, and you've only got 10 pounds on the other side. Well, now you know, holy shit, like, that's pretty out of balance. So if you want to create a balance, there's two ways to create a balance. You can either modify your life conditions to match your expectations. And in some cases, you can start with that. Like, for example, you might be anxious around, my office is messy and I really want my office to be clean. Okay, cool. Go clean your office. That will make you feel slightly better for a short period of time. You guys already know that, right? Like, and in fact, a lot of you guys just go do those simple little completion things because that's all you can figure out how to control. And it helps you avoid dealing with the stuff that you don't know how to deal with in the back of your brain that you can't control. That's why you guys do that stuff, because it gives you that temporary feeling of relief. So you can start with that stuff, but then to deal with the next level of stuff, we got to deal with the expectations, right? Like if I've got an expectation of I got to be perfect, I'm never going to be able to get my life conditions to match up with that. I've got to actually dismantle and eliminate that belief. You guys see that? Like I've got to annihilate that belief that says I got to be perfect in order to feel peace of mind, or whatever your version is. So that's why you got to identify each and every one of these conflicts, because you cannot change something that you are unaware of, right? That's why you got to ask these questions. All right. So phase 2, step 3. So step 1 was understand the formula for peace of mind. Step 2 was to identify all of your conflicting limiting beliefs. Step 3 is you need to challenge and eliminate your old limiting beliefs. We have a full in-depth process on this. We have done another training on this. I'm not going to take a ton of time on it. I'm going to give you kind of the 4 questions that you want to ask yourself. This is borrowed from Byron Katie. This is kind of the simplistic version. I have a more in-depth, like 9-step process we use with clients. But this is the bare minimum of what you would want to do. You want to ask yourself 4 questions for each one of those limiting beliefs that you identify out on paper. Number 1, is that really true? So for example, if my limiting belief is I have to be perfect or else I am not good enough, I would need to ask myself, is that really true? Yes or no? Okay, let's say I say yes. Then I move to question number 2. Question number 2, go ahead, by the way, put these in the chat. If someone doesn't mind, write these out. It will help the community. So question number 1, is that belief really true? Yes or no? Question number 2, can I absolutely know for sure that that belief is true? Yes or no? So in other words, do I have 100% of the information necessary to really truly know that I have to be totally perfect in order to be good enough and to no longer have any anxiety? What if I was totally perfect and I still had anxiety, right? Maybe I'm just enough and good enough without being perfect in the eyes of my parents or myself or my creator, like whatever your beliefs are, I don't really care, right? Like maybe I'm totally good without being perfect. So you would probably answer no to the second question, okay? So the third question is, who do I become when I believe that thought? So when I believe the thought of I have to be perfect or else I am not good enough, what does that cause me to, who do I become, right? Well, it makes me feel out of control, makes me feel lack of self-esteem, makes me feel, timid, things like that. So you got to get associated to the consequences of your old limiting belief. And then number four, question number four, it's not exactly a question, it's a step. Step number four of this process is you do what's called a turnaround. Doing a turnaround is you take the opposite of the belief. So in this example, it would be instead of I must be perfect in order to be good enough, the opposite of that is I am already more than good enough. That would be the opposite of that belief. And what you do is you list out 4 reasons why that opposite belief is true. And what this does is it literally rewires your brain. So I might go, well, I know I'm already more than good enough because, I've dedicated my entire career to helping out humanity. That's plenty. Number 2, wherever I go, whatever I do, I try to make other people's lives better. That's pretty good. Number 3, I'm good enough just because I exist, just because I'm on this planet, I'm good enough. Okay, so you can see where we're going with that. So you do a turnaround, and this is the rewiring process at the deepest core level. This is what the real internal work is. And basically by doing this, by identifying every old belief that's in your way, challenging it, and then coming up with a replacement belief. It's basically like going to a garden that's full of weeds. You pull the weed out, and then you plant what you want in the garden. That's what you're doing through this process. It takes a while. For most clients that we work with, they usually have like 6 to 10 big beliefs, and we have them do this belief challenging thing, but it is like one of the most valuable things you can possibly learn how to do and be really, really good at. It is so worth your time, because basically every single one of these beliefs that you eliminate, it's like taking a giant brick off your shoulder. Like I have people, when I guide them through this 9-step process, they start tearing up. They start like finally feeling light again. It's amazing, because there's just these things that they assumed were true going all the way back to their childhood. Like if you believed since you were a kid, like, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy of love unless I'm perfect, holy shit, that's some heavy stuff. So if we really like dig into the garden of your brain and pull that weed out, and that you're no longer feeling that anymore, oh my gosh, I mean, that's like total relief, it's really crazy. It happens like that. So you gotta identify the limiting beliefs, and you have to challenge and replace those limiting beliefs. That's the inner work that's gotta happen. All right. Next step in phase 2 is create a new set of beliefs. I had a slightly more complicated way of explaining it. I'm just going to keep it simple for that. Basically, create a new set of beliefs, and then the final step of phase 2 is reinforce and condition your new beliefs. The simplest way I could explain what will work for the majority of you, or at least get you like most of the result, is just change how you talk to yourself. So, for example, you might say, all right, I used to tell myself if I'm not perfect, I'm not good enough. And you then do that little turnaround process I just walked you through, and you go, okay, well, actually, I'm more than good enough. And so when we say reinforce and condition your new belief system, basically, it just means stop telling yourself the old garbage and tell yourself the new stuff. Because remember, repetition creates belief. And the degree to which you believe something is in direct proportion to how much you have told yourself that thing. As in, like, if somebody tells you something for the very first time, you're like, yeah, I don't know if I really believe that. But if you've been told that thing by like 1 million people 1 million times, you're like, yeah, I believe that. Okay. So, like, for example, if a news article came out that was like, Donald Trump dyes his hair purple, you'd be like, what? I don't know if I believe that. But if then like 50 people were like, yeah, no, I saw it on video, I saw it on picture, and I saw him talk at a rally with purple hair, you'd be like, okay, well, I guess I believe it. He's got purple hair. Who knew he could get any crazier? So that repetition creates belief. That's the key thing that you want to remember, okay? And that completes phase 2. And that's where like 75% of the work gets done is phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 3 is a whole lot simpler, and it's a lot easier once you actually just like do phase 1 and phase 2 properly. Phase 3 is a breeze. So phase 3 is about having a relapse prevention system. You must, if you really want to live an anxiety-free lifestyle, you gotta have a relapse prevention system. You must. It must be customized for you, and it needs to be bulletproof. If you do it correctly, you'll be good to go. Like, just like I've been good to go. Like, have I had ups and downs in my life? Sure. But I've never, ever had like depression or like, repetitive cyclical anxiety in my life. Like, once I dealt with it and handled it, I've never had it pop up in the same way ever again. And a big part of the reason is I've had this relapse prevention system. So there's 3 steps in the relapse prevention system. We'll wrap this up. I'll do any questions. If you guys have questions, put questions in the chat. I'll address those here at the end, and then we'll wrap up. We're probably like 9 minutes away from being done, okay? But pay attention, because this is where most people get things messed up. So step 1 of the relapse prevention system is you need to have a daily conditioning routine. At least when you're getting started. I will be honest, I don't have a daily conditioning routine anymore, but it's just because after doing this stuff for 10 years, like, I just don't need to do it anymore. But for your first like 6 months at least, you're gonna need a daily conditioning routine. So before we let a client graduate, we always create a daily conditioning routine. And basically it's just a way to rewire the brain, keep the brain rewired. We have like 12 different things that we go through to figure out what is the best thing that works for them. There's lots of things you can do. It's important to find the right effective thing. Like, don't just pick anything. You got to figure out the thing that's going to work for you. But, sometimes it's like a guided meditation. We do have some guided meditations. Meditation is not the end all be all. I'm not a guy that's like, hey, just meditate and you'll be fine. No, for some people, meditation just flat out doesn't work. For some people, it works incredibly well, but I prefer an actual guided meditation that actually rewires your brain, as opposed to just meditating and trying not to think about anything, which most people really suck at, and then they feel unsuccessful, and then they stop doing it, and that doesn't work very well. So a guided meditation tends to work a little better. That's one of the ones that we use. Some people do better with written stuff. We do have a written version. We call it the daily conditioning questions, and it's basically like a set of journaling prompts, but it literally gets your brain to rewire its thinking. So instead of you just like journaling and like free writing on a piece of paper, you're actually getting your brain to reinforce and develop stronger pathways of thinking. So there's all sorts of different things like that. You got to figure out what works for you. I really wish I could just give you, like, I guess if I could go back in time and tell my old self, like, here's what you need to do, what I would tell him to do is I would probably give him our daily conditioning questions, and I would also tell him to spend 5 minutes a day, first thing in the morning, imagining the day going exactly how he wants it to go, vividly detailed, hour by hour. That right there would probably help 90% of you get at least 70% of the way there. So I would do that. That would be a good way to do it. All right. The next thing is handle small problems and crises. This is step 2 of phase 3. You got to learn how to handle curveballs. Okay, so one of the things that we really believe in is that we are realists, right? So I am not the guy who's just going to tell you like, hey, it's all sunshine and rainbows, like, work on your mental health for 90 days, and then you're never going to be challenged in life ever again. You're never, ever going to have a negative feeling or emotion ever pop up ever again. It's all going to be smooth sailing. No, what I believe is that you can live a life without uppercase A anxiety, but you're still going to have a life with lowercase a anxiety. Lowercase a anxiety is normal, it's natural, it's healthy. Uppercase a anxiety is unhealthy, it's repetitive, it's cyclical, it limits you. It keeps you from doing what you want to do in your life. You can get rid of uppercase anxiety. Lowercase anxiety will come about here or there, but it's very temporary, and you don't need to be so worried about it. But one of the things that you got to be prepared for is how to handle curveballs. Okay, what is a curveball? A curveball is when something occurs in your life that is emotionally significant, that is going to derail you. Let's put it that way. So the way that we explain this is imagine you're driving down the road, you're headed towards a destination, you're listening to your music, you go, man, this is great. Like I'm on my way to grandma's house or whatever, and it's in the middle of the winter, and you hit a patch of ice, you start spinning out of control, you're headed towards a tree. Okay? Did you see the patch of ice? Probably not. Did you anticipate the patch of ice? No. Did you plan on it? No. But now you're headed in a very different direction. So, for example, many of you guys know my wife was diagnosed a few years ago with breast cancer. That was a curveball. We were not expecting that in the slightest, especially given her age. And it threw us for a loop, right? That was a curveball. We had to know how to handle the curveball, because a curveball, if you are unprepared, a curveball will create a relapse. If you are prepared and you know how to handle the curveball, then you will be able to handle it just fine. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be like totally happy and, smiling through the whole thing. Like it was challenging. Going through the cancer thing is challenging for anybody. But we were able to do it pretty gracefully, like all things considered, because we knew mentally and emotionally what to do. So I'm going to give you the core. There is a whole extra training we have on curveballs. It's like an hour long. There's a detailed step-by-step process, but I will give you the core of it, okay? What you really got to do when you're dealing with a curveball is you must refocus yourself on where you want to go. So you're hopefully noticing a theme here. Anxiety occurs when you focus on where you don't want to go. Peace of mind, content, joy, confidence occurs when you train your brain to focus on where you want it to go. So if you're driving that car, you hit the ice, you're headed towards the tree, what do you have to do? Do you have to keep staring at the tree, or do you have to turn your head and look in the direction of where you want to go? Which one, guys? Which one do you got to do? You must, even though it's uncomfortable, even though it feels unnatural, even though your brain wants to just stare at that tree, you got to focus on where you want to go. They've actually done studies on this and found that if you keep staring at the tree, you almost always hit the tree. If you turn your head and look where you want to go, you're able to pull yourself out of the literal spin of driving almost every time. And it works psychologically the same way. So when my wife got diagnosed, we created this little sticky note. I usually have it in my office here, but the sticky note had our rules. And the first rule on the sticky note was we are focusing on getting healthy, not focusing on what we fear might occur. And that was a key thing that we focused on each and every day. Because your mind is very naturally, when you go through a curveball, it's going to want to go and focus on what you fear. So what you got to do is you've got to plant a flag and say, no, this is where we're going. Okay, that's kind of the core of it. There's other things to it, but that's kind of the core. All right, and then the final step of the final phase, once you're prepared and you know how to handle curveballs and you know what to do when the next one occurs in your life, the final step of the final phase is you must make small daily progress on what we call your wheel of life, okay? Your wheel of life is basically just a visual metaphor for the 6 areas of your life that matter. Go ahead and write these down. The areas of your life that matter, we call these the areas of life mastery. So that is your physical health. Number 2, your sense of career or mission. Number 3, your relationships. Number 4, your finances. Number 5, your emotions. And number 6 is your spirituality, if you happen to have spiritual or religious beliefs. As many of you know, I'm not traditionally religious. I don't push religion on anybody, but I do know for a lot of people they do have religious beliefs, and I coach a lot of people with religious beliefs. And so for example, like if you are a Catholic and you have a belief that says, I need to be going to church every week, one thing I can tell you is you are going to feel anxiety if you don't get your ass to church. Or if you don't change your belief that says, I have to go to church every week, one or the other, but you got to do one or the other. Okay, so you must be living in alignment with your spiritual beliefs if you do have them. That's kind of the key thing there. So here's the key. I want you to write this down. Progress equals happiness. Progress equals happiness. I have very, very rarely encountered people who come to me and say, well, you know what, Ty, my career's going great. Like, I'm growing, I'm excelling, I'm doing well, I'm up for a promotion, I'm earning more every single year. That's going good. My relationships are going really well. My relationships are deepening. I'm growing closer to my kids and my wife and my parents and my friends and my family. My relationships are fantastic, going great, making progress on those consistently. My finances are great. They're going up and up and up. Slowly but surely, like it keeps going where it needs to go. My health, my physical health is progressing. I'm getting more fit. I'm getting healthier. I'm eating well. My spirituality is great. I feel really aligned with what I believe, and I'm doing what I believe I need to do. And emotionally, I'm making progress on my thoughts and sculpting my thoughts and my feelings. And I'm totally depressed. I have never had somebody who comes to me who tells me that. It just doesn't happen. And nobody who feels like they're making progress in those areas tends to have anxiety. Anxiety can only exist when you feel like you're stalling out in one or more of those areas. I would guarantee you, if you're dealing with repetitive chronic anxiety, at least one of those areas, probably more like 3 or 4, you feel like you are stuck in. Okay, and go ahead and list them in the comments. Let me know which of those areas they are. But if you've got to make sure that each day you have a system for making small progress, just every day, just a little tiny little bit of progress. And the simplest way to do that is to have an optimized, we call it your daily freedom routine. So basically just having your routine dialed in where every single day you're doing something that gets you like a tiny little percentage more progress. Because what that does psychologically is you'll go, man, at least I'm on the right track, and then immediately alleviates anxiety and depression. There's a million ways to do that, by the way. Like, you can have a planner, you can schedule it, you can do all sorts of things, but the big things that matter, you can already guess, right? For your physical health, you need to have some type of exercise type thing going on, at least 20 minutes we recommend. There's all sorts of things. We give the whole thing like with our clients. Number 2 is for your relationships, right? There's all sorts of ways to make progress every single day on your relationships. I mean, use your imagination, right? You kind of get it. But you need to have each one of these areas of your life at least somewhat dialed in. You don't have to have them perfect. You don't have to be totally where you want to be. You just need to be making progress, I would say at least weekly. It is virtually impossible. Hear me now really, really clearly. This is the last thought I'll leave you on. It is virtually impossible to live a life with anxiety if you feel like your life is continuously making progress. It's just basically impossible. And it's actually not that hard to make just a little bit of progress every single week. The thing that happens for people is they focus on perfection. And when you focus on perfection, of course, you can't reach perfection, so you feel like you're failing. When you feel like you're failing, you stop trying at all. When you stop trying at all, you stop making progress, and so you don't feel happy. So you got to redefine the goal. Instead of making the goal, I got to be totally anxiety-free, or my relationship has to be perfect, or my finances have to be here, or whatever. I just need to be making progress. That's how I define success. I know it sounds simple and cheesy, but it's true. If you focus on that and redefine the goal, it alleviates anxiety super, super fast, okay? So let me just run through these phases one more time in each one of the steps. I'm going to list them all out. Okay, so phase 1 is you got to retrain the brain. Phase 1, step 1, you got to identify every old pattern, all of the patterns of focus, all of the patterns of language that's causing you to feel anxious. Phase 1, step 2, you've got to interrupt and replace those old patterns using what we call the rumble strip, at least 10 to 12 times a day, asking yourself those questions. Okay, that'll get you started. That'll get the anxiety reduced about 20-25% if you stick with that for a couple weeks. Okay, phase 2 is you need to handle the anxiety from the root source of the problem, which is the conflicts in your beliefs. So phase 2, step 1 is you got to understand the formula for happiness, which is when your life conditions equal your expectations, you're going to feel happy. Okay, and you're going to feel peace of mind. Phase 2, step 2, I'm sorry, my notes are a little jumbled. So phase 2, step 1, understand the formula for peace of mind. Phase 2, step 2, identify every conflict in your belief systems that currently exists. Phase 2, step 3, eliminate those old limiting beliefs by challenging them, right? Is that really true? Can I absolutely know that that is true? Who do I become when I believe that? what is the opposite of that belief, and what are 4 reasons why that opposite belief is true. Okay, phase 2, step 4, create a new set of beliefs, which basically I just said, right? Phase 2, step 5, reinforce and condition those new beliefs by changing what you tell yourself. Phase 3 is create a relapse prevention system. Phase 3, step 1, have a daily conditioning routine that helps you rewire your brain and helps you keep the mental muscle where it needs to be. Phase 3, step 2, learn how to handle problems and curveballs, because they will occur. And you need to make sure that you're prepared of how to handle them so you don't relapse. Phase 3, step 3, have a daily routine optimized where you're making small progress on the 6 areas of your life that matter: career and mission, finances, physical health, relationships, emotions, and spirituality. If you do that, you're going to have an anxiety-free life if you do those things, okay? Now, doing that on your own, there's the path, there's the roadmap. Go ahead and do it. I will tell you, for October, we have a handful of client spots left. We've got 4 spots left, only 4. Right now I'm delivering this live stream to a Facebook group of 10,000 people. So what I'm inviting you guys to do is if you'd like help, if you want to speed this up, go ahead and put the word apply in the comments. What will happen is I'll shoot you a message on Facebook. We'll set up a really quick, no pressure 10-minute call. Basically, I'll get to know your situation. I'll let you know if I think my system would work well for you. And we'll see if you want some help implementing this, like actually getting it right, getting it done fast. It'll just take 10 minutes. So just put apply in the comments. Couple requirements though: you must either be a working professional or married to a working professional. Number 2, you must be somebody who's ready to take your mental health seriously. So like the type of person who wants to rip the Band-Aid off and get the anxiety dealt with, because I just don't deal with people who just want to like get a couple coping mechanisms and just try to manage and get by. I don't work with people like that. I only work with people who want to really get rid of the anxiety for good. So only apply if you're one of those people. And you need to be willing to dedicate just a couple hours a week on whatever time and whatever schedule you want to implementing the system that we give you, okay? Those are the only requirements. So go ahead and put apply if you want to make sure that going into 2025 is going to be your anxiety-free year. And if you end up being selected as a client, we have 2 really strong guarantees in writing. The first one is, if you don't love the system that I have for you within the first 7 days, you can get a complete total refund. So you get to go through the very first week, go through your first session with me, go through your first set of lessons, apply everything. If you don't love it and you don't think it was the absolute best thing you ever did for your mental health, cool, no problem. You walk away, no risk, and it only took a couple hours of your time to know for sure. Number 2 is if you stick with me for the 90 days, then if you don't feel satisfied that we've reduced your anxiety by at least 75% within 90 days, I continue to work with you one-on-one for free until you do. And a lot of people go, well, how do you measure 75%? So basically, like, ask yourself, how often am I feeling anxious these days? Like if you took the last 2 weeks and you said, okay, all of my waking hours, how many of those waking hours was I feeling anxious? Was it 90%? Was it 80%? Blah, 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 whatever, right? For many of you, it's like 90. What we go for is the target for us is to make sure that you are feeling anxious only 25% of the time or less. And we guarantee in writing that you will feel satisfied that that has occurred. And if you don't feel satisfied that that has occurred, I will keep working with you one-on-one until you do. The vast majority of our clients get that result and way above it. But that's what we're comfortable guaranteeing in writing, okay? So you basically have no risk if you end up being selected as a client, because we want to make sure you're successful. We don't let clients fail. It's just not in our MO. I mean, as long as you do what you're supposed to do, you stay in touch with us, you do your homework, stuff like that, like we don't let you fail. You do what you need to do, I do what I need to do. It all works really well, okay? So if you want help, go ahead and put apply in the comments. If you're joining on our podcast, go ahead and go to mentalhealthcoaching.com. You can submit your application there, but we only have 4 spots left. So you want to make sure you get that in really quickly. And otherwise, I don't see any questions in the chat. Thanks for those of you guys putting stuff in there. Cheryl, great to see you. Karen, great to see you. Naknud, Varsik, and thank you guys so much for showing up. We'll see you guys next week. Chat soon. See ya. Bye.